So you might be interested in adding more game objects to your scene as you're developing this. So let's say, because this is a window, I want to add some cross supports through the center of this frame. All right, so in order to add an object to my scene, I'm going to right click inside of my demo project files, and I'm going to come to 3D object, and here you'll see all of the different primitive shapes that we can add in Unity by default. And I'm going to select a cube. It's going to add this cube shape. What I want to do is I want to use the scale tool here to sort of begin to make this the size and shape of a cross support. So I'm going to scale it down on the x-axis, z-axis, up a bit on the y-axis until it looks about right. That looks pretty good to me. Then what I might do is right click that cube and duplicate it, and it's going to create cube 1 over here, and I'm going to rotate it. And I know that I want this to be exactly 90 degrees and I don't want to fuss too much, so I might just get it going and then come to Z parameter of my transform component in the inspector, and I'm just going to write -90 degrees. Come back to scale, and I'm going to increase this value a bit. And now I have this really nice window frame cross support. The materials that are added to these game objects we can find by selecting the game object, and we have a material. And by default, game objects that are added into the Unity scene have this default material. But we might want to add our own material to this game object. So to do that, in my project files, I'm going to come to my materials folder, and I'm actually going to create a new material for these cross supports. So I'm going to right click in this materials folder and then come to create material here. And it'll create this new material. I'm going to call it cross support. We have first the shader. We're going to stick with standard shaders primarily right now. And I'm going to change this by clicking that color option. It'll bring up this color picker menu. I'm going to make this black for right now. And then we can change the smoothness to make it shinier, glossier. Try a nice glossy high shine finish. And then we can add this material to our cross support in two ways. We can drag it and drop it to the object in our scene view, or we can drag it and drop it to the object in our scene hierarchy window. And we can add that way. Now when we select this, we'll see that material component has changed. And because this is no longer the default material, it'll bring us that same editor of that material, and we can configure different aspects of this in the game object inspector component. So we can say change it to red or to yellow, make different adjustments. Now these other game objects, our wall, for example, has a material applied to it, and our frame has a material which currently is set up to be fairly similar to the default material, but maybe we just want to be a little bit playful. We'll make our frame sort of like a cyan, and now we have this like fun color palette that we're working with. And if we come back to game view, we can see the perspective that this has with the camera. I think I also want to add a like window pane, like glass window. So I'm going to add another cube to my scene, and I'm going to adjust it to be about the size of a pane of glass. If you ever get lost navigating in the scene view, what I find really helpful is I can always double click a game object from my scene hierarchy and it will snap the scene camera to that game object, which is really useful. Okay, so I have this. I'm going to rename this game object by clicking on it once to glass. And I'm going to create a new material. The material is going to be called glass. And I'm going to add this material to my glass game object. And then I'm going to change the rendering mode from opaque to transparent. Then I'm going to take my color picker and I can see I have this alpha channel and I'm going to drop the transparency of this material to something like this right there. Something where I can still see there's a game object there slightly, but it is definitely see-through. And then I can, let's say we'll do an albedo alpha. We can work with the smoothness, how shiny this should be. So now I'm ready. I maybe want to try playing my game and see what happens. So if I hit play, what I'm going to notice, there's my particles. I can start to see this rotation that I remember from before, but my pane of my glass and my cross supports are actually rotating out of my window frame. Why is that happening? Well, it's because my cross supports and my pane of glass are not children of my main camera. So because we imported this project, this is actually what's called a prefab, which means it's a selection of game objects that are packaged together and then imported into the project. So in order to modify this, we're going to have to do something called unpacking, where we begin to separate these different components. So I right click, I'm going to click unpack prefab, and now I will have access to drag and drop into that hierarchy. And when I hit play, it does appear that everything is now moving together.